Here we have part 3 of the inaugural Alan Saunders lectures, Is Science Enough? Big Ideas program, ABC Radio National, and it's Simon Blackburn.
Combinatorial explosion. If each of our 25,000 or so genes can interact in a great number of ways with even a small proportion of the remaining 24,999, the underlying processes could number in the millions, would number in the millions, and the prospect of understanding them in fine detail is proportionately remote. The project of unraveling the genome itself, so widely applauded, was obviously trivial by comparison. Some of the complexity is already visible. As I was writing this essay, the morning paper told me that promising work on a particular gene, the beautifully named IRS1, for Americans in the audience that will not require unraveling. The IRS is, of course, the Internal Revenue Service. IRS1 has increased the age span of mice, but also had the surprising and unwanted side effect of them being about 50% of the size of normal mice. Of course, some factors may be heritable, suggesting even a modified Lamarckian revival. This is partly because the chromosomes that we inherit from our parents contain as much protein as DNA. And in any event, we inherit, literally, more from our parents than biological material. The blacksmith may be unable to pass on his acquired characteristics of brawny arms. Parents often pass on riches, language, land, and professions. But apart from scientific complexities, there are more philosophical problems to hand, and I want to conclude by mentioning some of those. And there are two resources, I think, coming from ancient philosophy that are relevant here. One is the Socratic doctrine of the unity of the virtues. Socrates held that the virtues formed a unified, a sort of homeostatic, as we now say, cluster. And you can't have one without the others. The idea is that one cannot simply be courageous or just or generous or merciful tout court. Exercising one virtue requires exercising others. If courage is not to be mere stupidity or mere lack of imagination, for example, it needs to be accompanied by awareness and judgment. Equally, if it is not to go over the top into mad rashness, then it has to be combined with caution and prudence. Similarly for other virtues. A judge or a governor of Texas cannot be merciful without being courageous, since sometimes that will be required in the face of the anger of the people clamoring for punishment and death, and so on across the board. Well, that makes any project of improving human nature with genetic intervention highly fraught. Do you want kinder, more generous people? Well, we try to get them by bringing people up in kind environments, gently rewarding exhibitions of kindness, discouraging the reverse. Might we have a magic genetic bullet bypassing this troublesome cultural exercise? Well, misjudged kindness is a bad thing. Parents who are too kind often spoil their children. They may smother them, or patronize them, or take away their initiative, infantilize them, or prevent their maturity. As Aristotle said, we want a mean, and as the Socratic doctrine says, it must go along with judgment, tact, imagination, respect for the dignity of others, and a host of other nuanced skills. And even then, there will be little consensus on when just the right mean has been achieved. All we can do is aim in general directions and then keep our fingers crossed. But when we look at more detail in the world as we have it, the picture becomes yet more complex. Most people are generous some of the time. Famously, Hitler was kind to animals. Suppose we found a genetic intervention that prevented the development of unkindness in any circumstance. That might sound to be a breakthrough, until we ask also whether it suppresses other things, such as resentment, sense of injustice, indignation at bad behavior, because those are some of the traits that have us being rather less generously or kindly disposed to some people than others. It seems that it must suppress those, but then is the resulting subject kind of alert and spry and well adapted for enterprises and for the variety of tasks the human being may face, Or is the resulting subject a kind of Stepford zombie, a kind of lobotomized parody of anything we would wish to admire? What we like, or what we would like, is somebody who's kind and generous to the right degree in the right circumstances. In other words, we want a relatively plastic disposition, and perhaps nature has beaten us to it. But imagining it caused by a magic bullet seems to me an utter fantasy. It is like imagining somebody navigating the social world without experience, which is no more likely than navigating an unfamiliar city or a coastline, also without experience. Even if we confine ourselves to that old and apparently uncontroversial aim of eugenics, or cause for congratulations, improved intelligence, worries arise. Intelligence can famously be used for good or bad, strategically or cooperatively. Wily Odysseus was the most intelligent of Agamemnon's men, much admired for his deceptions and frauds, lies and plots. And it too is subject to a host of complexities. Even within the charmed meadows of academic life, we all know colleagues, brilliant people in their field, who you wouldn't trust very far outside that field. Until researchers find a gene for getting hold of the wrong end of the stick and manage to remove it from the population without any other side effects, I don't think we should hold our breath. Well, all these are remarks about the nature of the aim and are entirely abstract. But when we turn to imagining the possible implementation of genetic interventions, I fear that things get worse. We would not be naive if we thought that new genetic designs, synthetic biology, would be immune to catastrophic mistakes or catastrophic misuse, error or terror, as it's being called. We would also be naive if we thought a genetic utopianism would be immune to the normal pressures of politics and commerce. The forces in charge of propelling us towards the future are not future forces, but present ones. We know that the eugenicists of the 20th century were, for example, Aryan racial supremacists, had a very peculiar view of human excellence. Who would like to guess what those of this and subsequent centuries might be? Capitalism would like an intervention promoting consumer envy and lifestyle discontent. People on the right would like one diminishing concern for social justice, while those on the left would like one for increasing it. Pharmaceutical companies would not pay for research to make childhood naughtiness disappear without their continued help. And while moralists put in their bid for kindness and intelligence, the Pentagon will press for a less compassionate and more docile soldiery, and citizenry for that matter. In other words, we should be aware of the idea that there is an abstraction called science, an insightful, imaginative, impersonal, just, benevolent, invisible hand that we can leave the people of the future to. There is no such hand. As William James also said, the trail of the human serpent is everywhere. And of course, given that in the foreseeable future genetic interventions look like being very expensive, we might not entirely welcome a world in which the wealthy get something approaching a disease-free immortality with excellent brains thrown in, and the rest of us go hang. Well, I've spent much of my time sounding cautionary notes, but I hope I have tried to alert you to some of the complexities of interpretation, some of the complexities that we can derive from the philosophical tradition and from the general humanistic tradition, because here I see no difference between learning what you want to learn about human nature from Socrates, Plato, Hume, Aristotle, Kant, and the rest, right down to our present day. I make no serious distinction between doing that and learning what you can about human nature from reading whoever it might be. I've mentioned Tolstoy and Proust, or Shakespeare, or Ibsen or Shaw, or whoever the playwright that you prefer may be. Workings out scenarios in which human beings express their nature, recognizing ourselves in them, those are ways of educating us into understanding the social world around ourselves. However, I want to finish on an upbeat note. I want to say I find it immensely interesting and encouraging that the old Delphic injunction, know thyself, now rules so much scientific activity, as well as its old domain, the humanities. I think there are no trade union barriers in the pursuit of knowledge. The investigation of human nature is, as I began by saying, as old as philosophy. It's as old as Homer and Augustine. And it's as new as the latest ideas from game theorists, evolutionary psychologists, neurophysiologists, pharmacologists, zoologists, economists, perhaps even quantum theorists and engineers. And it's very hard work listening to everyone. And we need to be careful. But I think we also need to be grateful for the feast, and especially grateful to people such as Alan Saunders, who worked so hard and effectively to bring as much of the feast as possible to us. Thank you very much.
British philosopher Simon Blackburn. He's a Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge, and half-time research professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And he was delivering the inaugural Alan Saunders Memorial Lecture on the question of whether science alone can explain human nature, honouring the former RN presenter of the Philosopher's Zone who passed away last year. We'd love your thoughts and reflections. You can tweet us at RNBigIdeas or post your comments online at abc.net.au/Radio National. Tomorrow night...
Well, there you go. Science is apparently not enough to explain or direct human nature. There's more to it than that, because there is no such entity as science. What there is the scientific method of problem solving. It's a way of thinking. Ciao.